Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live chat. I am here tonight to give a bit of a deep dive discussion on land use, planning, development in the city of St. John. Obviously, there's been a lot of things happening since this is coming up. I'm working on my third year as your counselor at large, and there have been countless developments since 2015. We've basically prepped, and the majority of this has been in the last 2-3 years. But since 2015, we've basically um, positioned the city for 3,000 residential units. And we have been working away at constructing those 3,000. There's about 250 under construction right now. There's all kinds of new developments being proposed. Our planning advisory committee, our PAC, has been busy. And certainly at council, we've had some pretty interesting discussions around development and around the future readiness of our city and growth readiness, if you will. So I wanted to give an opportunity for you, the audience, to people I'm responsible to, those who elected me, to chime in and with your comments. So I'm just going to do a quick little. I can bring up your comments here if I need to. I can click away. So go ahead, and if you're on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, you should be able to see this. I'm just going to make sure that our feeds are good. I'm going to take a peek here. Looks like we're good on Twitter. It looks like we're good on Facebook. I'm just going to retweet that, get that word out there. And here we are. Perfect. So it looks like everybody's live. And I wanted to start tonight off with just a bit of a recap, a little bit of a overview of what is going on. I wanted to give an opportunity for a question and answer for sure. And I wanted to show a video that you can reference in the future. I'll post a link to it after I show it. But it's one of these videos that has really shaped my perspective when it comes to development and what the implications are, how we do it intelligently, how we do it that from a data-centered design perspective, I guess, so that we're leading with good data to make good decisions. And I recognize, though, that just because you're making so-called data-informed decisions, you're using the best data you can to make decisions from a land use and development perspective, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be okay with it. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree with it. And my inbox for my city email certainly tells that story, that there is concerns, there's disagreement, there is different opinions and perspective. And I do my best to hear those and listen to those. But inevitably, when we do our research and we look into these things, we develop our own perspectives, and we develop our own opinions about what it is that best practice is, what it is that the ideal future state is, what success should look like, what outcomes we should be focused on, all that. So I want to do that, and first let's start off by going over what drives our decision making. So when it comes to land use, when it comes to planning, when it comes to development, what do I mean by those? Let's break that down. Land use is just this idea, this concept that is embedded in our local government act, our local governance act, sorry, the LGA of the province of New Brunswick, which drives the capacities, the authorities, and the responsibilities of your local municipality to assemble, prepare, and zone land. So that's land use, right? From a land use perspective, we have directives from the province that we can't do anything about. So a lot of people won't realize this, but our local government, our city staff, our council, we cannot we can't go over top of the province. If they have set and established a policy and legislation, for example, the Local Governance Act, we have to abide by that. So that's one criteria. And in that, what it basically says is that a municipality has to provide a fair process for private owners and developers to be able to zone land, to get their permits, to build. And we have to have certain processes involved, like our planning advisory committee. That's an obligation that has to have public personnel as well as elected personnel. So that's one part. There's legal obligations in there. There is process obligations, all that. Then there's our planning side. So that's land use. And that's kind of got the province over here giving us um, the perspective as well as the directive to go and do things. Planning is a bit different. So planning from a city perspective or an urban perspective is a very important feature because land is not abundant. It You have limited borders and you have all these synergies and populations in your urban areas that require a different perspective to be able to capitalize, synergize, if you will, and make the best of what you got. If we just had people throwing up single detached homes in St. John, it would never be a city, it would be a town, right? So that's one piece of it. And if you had huge lot sizes given to everybody, then again, you'd be back to that same scenario where it's like, okay, well, that's not a city, that's a town. So cities have a very different reality to them. They can't just grow their borders. They don't have a lot of land. They're looking for density so that they can provide services. And so planning is really that practice about how do we best design our city so that it works for people and it works for business and it works for the commons, if you will, the common good. So that's our planning. And then we have developments, and developments are these things that could come from the public sector, could come from government, like our public housing sector, could come from nonprofit sector, or could come from private sector. And all those three entities, those three different groups, they come and they suggest buildings, they suggest ideas for development. They have investors that want to build somewhere, or they themselves want to build their own homes or whatever. And that's that development side of it. So, from a municipal perspective, we were to kind of give that an overall umbrella. What we'd be looking at there would be land use gives us all of the direction we need from a authority's perspective, from a legislative perspective. Planning lays out what we want things to look like in the future, what our zoning is, and what types of developments go there. And then developments hopefully come in and follow suit. They come in and they say, okay, we see you are looking for this here. We can build this here. Will you, get us the permit? Do we need to rezone for a little bit higher density? What is the case? So that's just an overall kind of perspective on land use and planning and developments. And like I said, right at the top of the hour, we have a lot of approved buildings in St. John, and some of them have received contentious attention recently, with Barber's General Store being one of them. And neighborhoods getting bigger apartment buildings added to them that causes people to be upset, concerned, etc. So there is no shortage of work to do to try to explain this, to try to put together a coherent narrative about where it is we're going, why we need to go there, why we justify certain developments and not others, etc. And if you have questions, feel free to fire them off anywhere. We don't have a lot of viewers at this current moment. It's summer solstice. It's really nice out. I'm not surprised. This is going to live on YouTube, so I will check our comment section on YouTube as regularly as I can, just to make sure I get back to you all. So no pressure. If you've got stuff to do tonight, get out there, enjoy that weather, and we can revisit those comments on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. So that's kind of the high level of where we get our direction from, where we get our guidance from, and where we find our developments. Like I said, we have a lot of developments approved by council, which means we've given the green light for them to go ahead, and they need to come back and get permits. And that's the place that we're falling down. People will talk a lot about capacity, and there's no question that capacity is limited. And that's because we divested our public education sector, as well as our societal appreciation for the trades and for the blue collar work that needs to happen. As a person who swings a hammer, I can say when I was graduating high school in 2007, going off to university was the ideal. Going off to university was seen as the most productive thing, most advanced thing, most prolific thing you could do. And so I did. I went and got my degree at Mount Allison in history and international relations. And I went on to do some master's studies at U of T. I never finished my master's, but I took a few courses there and transferred to another school and a few more courses there. But with regards to swinging a hammer, for me, that just came because in between contracts and jobs, you needed work. And I was always, sought after because I worked that in my youth. I did, started on roofs, went to cabinetry, went to rough construction and carpentry and framing and things like that. So I developed a pretty wide scale set of expertise. Did never went and got licensed or never went and did my blocks, but I certainly was able to run a construction team eventually and all that. And so I know a few things about the capacity problem. And that's certainly one of the places where we fell down. We we believed that learning information was more important than learning skills, and we don't necessarily support our trade sector. The wages that are there for general laborers, for example, although they're better than minimum wage for sure, they're not as high as other sectors. And yes, you can make a great living as, a fully licensed, fully blocked Red Seal tradesperson. At the end of the day, though, that was not seen in our school system as the thing to do. And there was people that were pushed into it. And, if you're like me going to high school, taking shop class was seen as the bird course, which is a problem. And we're having to pay the price for that now because we don't have the capacity to build what we need. To give you an idea, what does St. John need to continue to meet our targets? We need about 700 units a year. We're hitting about 300. So we're not there. We can't keep up with the demand that exists for people who want to move here. And beyond that, we have businesses expanding, hiring. Some of the big ones would be the different companies around the port, the longshoremen, the DP World, the transportation industry, NB Southern, trucking companies, NB Southern's rail, and port itself, Port St. John. Then we have, big companies like JDI and Cook Aquaculture and Irving Oil that are always adding to their workforce. And we have other companies out there too that are moving in and expanding and growing. So we just can't. That's the biggest impediment to growth for us is being able to house the people that want to move here to work here. Unemployment is down. It's still higher than we would like to see in St. John. But that's down too, right? There's more people working than ever before. And yet we have this crisis of housing that is obvious. We see more people homeless. We know stories about people who were living in homeless shelters this year, yet they were working full time because their building got bought by somebody and they eventually got pushed out. So there is no shortage of problems to solve here, right? And at the end of the day, when it comes to planning, let's take a quick peek. I'm going to do a little presentation here about our zoning and about Plan SJ. Plan SJ is our municipal plan. And Plan SJ is kind of the product. It's about 10 years old. That's right, it's about 12 years old now. But it was the result of 2 years of planning, research, and extensive community engagement. So about thousands of St. Johners were able to contribute to this. There was a 13-member citizen committee of council, which included 10 citizens that contributed to this, and we came up with this plan that was going to lay out the zoning, the future state, etc., about where it is that the city needs to go. And so, Heather, I see your question. Just so you know, Heather Boyd, I'll get to that in just a quick second. I just wanted to finish this little summarization up um, about the planning that went into Plan SJ, and I'm going to do a little bit of a screen share here so people can see it. But just stick with me for another couple of minutes, Heather, and I'll get to your question specifically. So I'm going to present my screen. And here we go. So you all should be able to see my screen, and this screen is a bit of a picture of the city. And you can see all these colorations, right? So here we have the uptown area. You know, we've got our west side, we got Ward 1 over here. And that goes obviously all the way up into Martinon. Oh, sorry, wrong thing. We have the north end. Obviously, this big green massive area is Rockwood Park. And we have the east side. And you'll see these different colors. And if you look, so this is available to you. Anybody can find this. It's on our website. You can just type in Plan SJ. And you can kind of see our primary development areas, future land use, things like that. But if we were to, one second, move out, there we go. You can kind of see this little pane over here that shows what the different colors mean. And so obviously, you know, you want your higher density to be in that core, but then unavoidably, you're going to have to allow and mix space for some of that density to come to other areas, right? Just as the city grows, you can't continuously build up, and and you have to make space available where it makes sense, where there's services that justify it, where the sewage is appropriate, where I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Just one second. All right, we should be back here. Great. So, you know, the sewage has to be right. The electrical has to be right. There has to be, you know, pedestrian access. There has to be the right road mixture and all that. So we try to make sure that and Plan SJ guides our decision making on that. So it's a plan that has had lots of engagement, and it guides our decision making, and it's really informed. It's an award-winning plan. At the time, it was an award-winning plan, and informs our decision making going forward. So all that to say, that's Plan SJ. Now let's get to Heather's question. So this is one reason why I was doing tonight. I'm a little disappointed that I don't see more of the people who emailed me saying, you know, I want to say around 30, 35 emails about Quinton Heights, Quinton Ave rezoning. So this is Heather Boyd saying, I'm specifically concerned about the 49 Quinton Ave rezoning. Apartment buildings and residential is very upsetting, and I'm worried about the traffic and parking issues in my neighborhood. Well, you're not alone, Heather. There was a ton of engagement on this, but this has happened all over the city. We've put larger apartment buildings out on Loch Lomond in what we would call low rise residential neighborhoods. We've expanded to more mid rise development on the west side, in the north end, especially in the north end. It's very common to see that type of development, apartment buildings where there were once just single detached family homes. And so the concern you have about parking and traffic in the neighborhood and all that is warranted. But I want to I want to say that there is a whole lot of best practice here. There are national guidelines that we adhere to, that our traffic engineer would adhere to. There are best practices from a planning perspective, from a land use perspective, from you know, pedestrian perspective. All of that has to come to bear. And St. John has been inordinately overbuilt for cars. We are at a massive disadvantage because of decisions that were made the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s to really blow open the roadways in the city. We have hundreds and hundreds of lane kilometers of road. We have 3 to 4 times as many lane kilometers of road to look after as other cities in this province alone. And we have a much larger geographic area to service than any other city in this province. And it creates a bit of a unique reality. But this idea that traffic and parking should drive our decision making has been dispelled quite a lot by people who study this, and they study the long-term, viability. They study the long-term capacity as well as success of cities. And so cities that just make, they block off what's called um, exclusionary zoning areas. So they'll say, no, you never touch this neighborhood. This neighborhood's only going to be single detached family homes or very, very low rise residential construction. That's called exclusionary zoning. And they say, no, never will anything be built there. That has been shown to destroy cities. It makes it completely unaffordable. So people will say to me, well, I pay high taxes. And I say to you, actually, your tax bill compared to other cities is lower. And no one believes me. But when you compare a bungalow in Moncton to a bungalow in St. John, even though our tax rate is higher by a little bit, we pay less taxes because it's assessed at less. And some of the reasons why it's assessed at less is because these neighborhoods are beside lots of roadways, lots of lanes. Like Main Street is kind of the most egregious example of poor planning that happened in the past that we have to live with now and try to figure out what to do with. It's 6 lanes of road going from the core of your city to another residential area of the city, the North End, the old North End. And the highway that goes through the city is only 4 lanes. So it's like, why would you do that when you have your main highway 4 lanes and something like that 6 lanes? Well, the idea is, we need to move cars. Well, cars don't pay taxes, and the streets cost money, the sidewalks cost money, the sewage underneath, the rainwater underneath, the electrical conduit you have to run underneath, everything like that costs money. It's ours to pay. It's our city. So we have to pay for it. So when we start to put more people together in higher dense scenarios, we start to synergize and we start to really recover on those costs. And from a sustainability, it's not negotiable. If you try to turn St. John into a town, we would go bankrupt, right? We have to live like a city, and we have to act like cities do. And so the concerns about parking in your neighborhood are absolutely warranted, but I want to suggest there are best practices to help us figure out what is dangerous, what is reasonable, what is unreasonable, etc. And so, is there any updates? Well, PAC voted. That's the Planning Advisory Committee that decides. So, with regard to 49 Quinton Avenue, this development that was proposed, PAC decided at their meeting just this week to turn it down. Now, that's not the end of it. The applicant is due their process. So it can come to council and staff may disagree with PAC. So staff may say, well, PAC is recommending we don't do it, but your staff, the City of St. John staff, is recommending that you do for the following reasons. And then it's up to your elected representatives, myself included, to figure out what are the facts? What is the best practice? What data do we have? Where do we need the city to go, etc. And I'm actually legally not allowed to comment on what my opinion about 49 Quinton Ave is, whether it should be a yay or a nay. I'm not allowed to do it because that would be as if it would be like a judge passing judgment before a hearing, right? If if you were being held before a court and a judge that was going to hear your case went online and said, well, I think it should be turned down and he should be sent to jail or she should be, whatever, then you would file a major grievance and get, the ruling overturned because of undue process. So it's no different for us. We have to be able to be open-minded. We have to be able to weigh the facts right up to the public hearing. And that public hearing will be coming to council soon. So thank you for your question on that. Another question there, Heather. I see you coming in. Thank you for that. Concerned about the appearance of an apartment building across the street from my house. So again, private buildings are private buildings. There are some things that we can do from a minimum standards perspective. So boarded up doors, boarded up windows, dangerous and dilapidated buildings. That's all stuff that's on our program. We have programs to monitor it. There's 50 some buildings that are abandoned in the city that our firefighters have to go to and inspect regularly. And somebody recently on Facebook said, this council's not doing anything about that. They don't care. Another drop ball. These guys couldn't run a 2-car funeral, 2-car funeral, a lemonade stand. It's just ridiculous, you guys. You don't know what you're talking about and you're not paying attention. And I hate to sound disrespectful, but that is an incredibly disrespectful thing to say to someone like me who puts in the time, who puts in the work, and can justify my decisions all day about how I might make up my mind or what I'm weighing the facts of or how I'm doing the research. So it is incredibly disrespectful just to go online and say, these guys don't know what they're doing. They're dropping the ball as always, because they're not. We've done a lot of work around the dangerous dilapidated buildings program. We're advocating for the province to turn around times on tax delinquent landlords so we can expropriate buildings faster. We want to tax vacancy at a different rate so that we're properly incentivizing people occupying. We're not incentivizing vacancy, because right now, if you leave your building vacant, you're rewarded with lower taxes because your assessment comes down. That's ridiculous. You still have the same sewage, the same water, the same sidewalk, the same firefighters, the same police officers, the same parks and recreation access, same transit access as everybody else. And you should have to pay for that. And you should be incentivized to make sure that building houses people, especially in a housing crisis. That's new. That's only 2 years. That's not even 2 years, sorry, a year old. That's new. We've done that work. We've put in the work to figure that out. And we're advocating, and our staff is on it, right? We're trying to set up a municipal housing entity to quarterback things in a way that's never been done before. Has been done before, but in the distant past, right? When we had a housing entity back in the 70s and 80s, we want to bring that back to play, where we were building more, we were building faster, and we were building arguably good developments for the city. So even though we've learned a lot, and it can bring a lot of that learning to bear. So with regards to appearance, we can only do so much to force people to change the appearance. If it's not seen as dangerous, then we have to consider that as their right to have their house as they want. So I can't go to my neighbor and say, hey, I don't like your deck. I think it should look like this, and then petition my city councilor to pass a bylaw to make it look like that. That would be highly inappropriate, right? Would be against a lot of our legislation even. And even with new legislation the province is passing right now, it's giving the province the ability to come into cities and communities and say, hey, that's a bylaw you passed, we're going to overturn it because it's not best practice. And although I don't agree with that bill, it goes to show how challenging this is. Okay, here we go. I got Ann McShane. Ann McShane is one of these. Sorry, it's a big comment from Ann. Thank you, Ann, for this. Ann McShane is one of these architects behind Plan SJ. She was very involved with it. She's on our PAC. And I look to Ann a lot of the time for guidance and direction on some of this. She's very knowledgeable. So she's saying, I'd like to see the city present or at least formalize what gentle density additions to stable areas looks like. Some cities have allowed 4, 6, even 12 units units by right in all neighborhoods. Where is St. John heading? Do we have a max or do we have a minimum servicing requirement, sidewalks, transit, etc., to recommend greater density beyond a certain point? Is greater density on concerns main artery and as the city has suggested in the past? And you're right, we have not done the work except the Central Peninsula Plan. So we've talked about Plan SJ, and that guides a lot of the citywide decision making, but the peninsula itself, the uptown corridor of our city, has its own plan. And that plan has been paying big dividends for us. That plan is a few councils old now, but it has driven the highest growth rate of any urban core in the country for a few years for us. So last year, our urban core, the uptown, had an 11% growth rate. High growth rate. So that plan, it lays out some of these more forward-thinking perspectives, but that's not across the city, right? So this is where it becomes case by case, and this is where the frustration is that I know you're talking about, Anne, where it's just like, what is it that's driving? Like, why is it that you might have something approved on Loch Lomond Road, but then not approved over on the west side? And until we have a coherent strategy to guide that, it is going to be case by case. And that is a next step for us. So right now, just so you know, we are working on rolling out our North End neighborhood plan. So that will layer on this future prediction, this future state, these standards that you're talking about for the North End. We have them for the South End. That being said, we have not hit a home run on the Central Peninsula plan. I know my friend Brian Wilson will say, look, the Central, and he studies this stuff religiously about good city building perspective, because he appreciates the city and he knows it could be so much better, and he knows how much it harms our neighborhoods and the people that live in them to have inappropriately and ineffectively built neighborhoods. It's bad for our psychology. It's bad for our sense of connection. It's, certain neighborhoods with streets certain width, you just don't see people crossing to go talk to each other. They've done studies that show when you have narrower streets, it's more likely that somebody on one side of the street will see someone on the other side of the street and cross to go talk to them and make connection and build community. And that's been replicated in numerous studies. I got a video a little later coming up that I want to put on here that we can just play and we can talk about on this idea around direction. And one of the things around direction that I think about often is, we have our priority neighborhoods, and a lot of people wouldn't realize this, but our priority neighborhoods more than likely subsidize the rest of our city. And you'll think, no way, the high rate of poverty in these neighborhoods, there's no way that's the case. I can assure you, case after case and other cities show that poor neighborhoods produce far more tax density. So what do I mean by tax density? So if you're in a neighborhood and there's 1,000 homes in that neighborhood, and that neighborhood is, say, 7-8 kilometers away from plow trucks, street sweeps, other services, asphalt to get there, all that. But there's this other neighborhood, and so there's one over here, 7 clicks out of the core, it's 1,000 people. And there's this other neighborhood, and it's in the middle of the core, and there's 3,000 people that live there, and they live on a smaller lot. That's tax density. And we're going to watch a video right now that I think encapsulates this really well, that I would love to see brought to bear in our future thinking and our planning with regards to development, planning, and land use in St. John. We aren't there yet. This is not me saying this video is what council has done by any stretch. This is me and my own personal learning, trying to figure out how best to shape our city, how best to lay things out, and how to look at developments like 49 Quinton Ave and have a coherent narrative on how to make a decision about it, because I don't live in that neighborhood. People have asked me, well, would you want this apartment in your backyard? I say yes. I'm a YIMBY, right? I would call myself a YIMBY. Yes, in my backyard. I want quality in my backyard, but I know out in Martinon, where I live, we don't, as a neighborhood, even though my neighbors will argue with me on this, we don't as a neighborhood produce the same level of wealth for the city as some of our priority neighborhoods. And here's the video that will prove that. So I'm going to share this screen with everybody, and it's about 10 minutes long. We're not going to watch the whole thing. I'm just going to let it play for a few minutes. So I hope you'll stick with me, and we're going to come back and we're going to spend the last 10, 15 minutes. Any more questions you have, please plug away. Just give this a few minutes, watch with me, and we'll talk about it, because it brings to light a lot of different perspectives and a lot of learning that's happened over the last 10 years. All right, so here we go.
This is the city of Lafayette, Louisiana. It's a pretty typical mid-sized American city. Like most American cities, it has that one nice old building that didn't get bulldozed in the 60s. And like most American cities, it's broke. It's full of aging infrastructure in desperate need of repair and not enough money to maintain it. But unlike most American cities, Lafayette acknowledged this fact and requested the help of Strong Towns and Urban 3, a consulting company that helps cities better understand the economic impact of development. Their analysis in Lafayette uncovered a harsh reality that should be a wake-up call to every municipality in North America, as well as any city emulating the American car-centric style of development. But let's back up a bit. In a previous video in this series, we discussed how two identical lots in the same city have very different property tax revenue. In this example, a 100-year-old commercial block built in the traditional style of development drastically outperformed a shiny new development created in the modern car-centric style. But despite the differences in revenue, both blocks have the same cost to the city to maintain their infrastructure. So by bulldozing an old block of shops to build this car-centric second-rate taco joint, the city was destroying its wealth. This example alone should be enough to convince anyone that the modern car-centric suburban style of development is broken, but it's worth exploring this further. Does this hold up in other cities? And what happens when we bring into account the cost of servicing these properties with roads, water pipes, sewers, etc.? And that brings us back to Lafayette. This is a map of the revenue and expenses data uncovered by Urban 3. So what are we looking at? Well, any successful business tracks its ROI, its return on investment. When making a decision between two competing projects, it's critical to know which one will result in the most revenue compared to the investment put into it. And too many projects with a negative return on investment could bankrupt a company. But in order to know your ROI, you need to know two things: your revenue and your expenses. Urban 3 created a kind of municipal return on investment for Lafayette. This map shows the municipal revenue per acre. So why per acre other than the fact that Americans can't use metric? Well, every property in a city needs services, and the majority of services get more expensive the more spread out they are. Roads are the obvious example. The farther a parcel of land is from everything else, the more asphalt is needed to get there. The worst case scenario are cul-de-sac, which are basically just city-subsidized driveways. This also applies to water infrastructure, sewers, and all other physical infrastructure, as well as the cost of policing, fire department coverage, and even the cost of providing education. But while per area revenue is actually quite a good approximation, Urban 3 wanted to fully understand these expenses, so they painstakingly calculated the cost of services for each parcel of land in Lafayette. It looks something like this. This shows every area that's a net positive for the city in gray, and every area that's a net negative in red. And here it is in 3D. This analysis has some fascinating results. The first is that downtown is wildly profitable. This is a bit surprising because there's nothing particularly remarkable about downtown Lafayette. It's certainly not bad, but you'd never know from looking at these pictures that this is the economic engine of the city, while places like this are a drain on city finances. But this shouldn't be too surprising when you think about it, because there's an insane amount of asphalt and infrastructure here for a very small number of shops. And for some bizarre reason, the Google Street View car drove down every aisle of this parking lot. But since they did it over multiple years, you can move down this way and watch the Toys R Us go out of business. Most of these profitable gray areas are the historical neighborhoods built along the river. But one of the biggest spikes is this place, a modern mixed-use walkable neighborhood called River Ranch. Places like this are a net positive for the city. One of the most shocking discoveries that Strongtown's discovered is that the replacement cost of all of the infrastructure in Lafayette, something that you would expect to happen over about one generation, was about $32 billion. And that's just infrastructure, not all the other everyday costs needed to run a city. Yet the existing tax base was much smaller than that. In order to bridge the difference, Strongtown's calculated that the average family in Lafayette would see their tax bill go from about $1,500 per year to $9,200 per year. But the median household income in Lafayette was only $41,000 at the time. There's simply no way that can happen. But those simple averages are hiding the bigger picture of who's subsidizing who. Because these gray sections are the poorer areas, while these red areas are significantly wealthier. So here's a fun quiz. Which of these two neighborhoods is subsidizing the other, number 1 or number 2? Yeah, it's the first one that's subsidizing the second. The poorest people in Lafayette are consistently subsidizing wealthy suburbanites. But I don't want to pick on Lafayette here. As I said at the beginning, there's nothing particularly unique about Lafayette, and these results are typical for most American cities. Well, I guess in Lafayette, the suburban sprawl is built on former wetlands, which results in unusually high costs for stormwater management, but otherwise, it's pretty typical. So let's look at another city that's not literally built on a swamp, Eugene, Oregon. Here's the Urban 3 map of taxable value per acre. Once again, downtown is clearly visible. And here's the 3D map of revenue compared to expenses. It's still obvious where downtown is, but you might be wondering about this little bump over here. This is Crescent Village, a modern mixed use development, because once again, these kinds of mixed use walkable neighborhoods financially outperform car dependent suburbia every single time.
All right, I'm going to stop it there because that says enough right there. These things, these types of neighborhoods, mixed use, walkable neighborhoods, outperform modern car centered neighborhoods every single time. Why should you care? Because when we have a profitable city, when the finances work and the infrastructure is looked after, you also see um, longer term flourishing of the communities of the people who live there. Social determinants of health are better. You know that the healthcare costs are lower, the amount of time spent in ERs are lower. Like they go on to talk about some of this stuff. That's why we should care, because we're looking at crisis after crisis. You know, when I've been asked to give a few talks in the past few months, and one of the things I do is I go through the different situations that have occurred over the past 3 years, and then I say, look, welcome to an age of crisis. We all feel it. You know, you go to a grocery store today, you see a security guard. Um, that's not normal. We haven't always had to do that. People are struggling. People are homeless more than ever before. People are working and homeless. People are working and not being able to afford the cost of living. Um, and I won't get into my overall rant on how society has allowed that to happen and what we could do about it, but from a development perspective, from a land use and planning perspective, we have to care because the design of the city matters. If you have people who are living in these mixed use, more walkable neighborhoods and you disown your allegiance to the car, you create more profitable businesses, you create a more profitable city, and you create more connected people, and you save yourself on healthcare, you save yourself on all sorts of costs. And as we've seen, the way we've done this in the past has meant that the poorest in our communities have to subsidize the wealthier neighborhoods, and it's obvious, right? Because wealthier neighborhoods, they want that quarter acre lot. They want that 2,500, 3,000 square foot, four or five bedroom, three bathroom, two bathroom, whatever, hot tub, pool neighborhood. So we have to care about it. And I'm not here saying that St. John is hitting home runs on this, but this is the learning that we need to do as a city. And it's going to take all of us to learn it in order to change it. You know, we've done some work recently to try to figure out Main Street. We're getting held back on Main Street because the New Brunswick Highway Corporation, that is Dexter and that group that does the number one highway, all of a sudden had to do major work on that bridge. So it took the work we were going to do to take the lanes away from Main Street and make it more friendly for people to walk on it. If you've ever had to walk on Main Street across 6 lanes of road, you know how dangerous it is. And there's a lot of single moms and there's a lot of single dads and there's a lot of kids that live in the North End that would love to be able to get access to the uptown area, the aquatic center, the library, and these services and these areas to bump into each other, and the new plaza that we're building down near the Funday Key. All of that is beautiful community ground that will bring people together. But if you can't get to it without a car, what are we even doing? Um, so this is the kind of thinking that I observe. This is the kind of um, learning I've tried to do to figure out, okay, how do I take this development that's being proposed in this place over here and make a good decision about it? And I think, you know, my job as your counselor is to try to share that with you and say, this is what I'm convinced of. And if other people out there are convinced of something different and you have good data and information like that to bring, I'm happy to see it. But all too often, what I hear is, oh, well, the traffic's going to be bad. I'm just not convinced by that, right? There's so many communities I've lived in. And once you get outside St. John, you know um, that there's so many communities that have way worse traffic. But because the roads are designed safer and they're not as wide and you don't have 6 lanes of traffic happening through it, you know, it's just safer and it's better for people overall, and people still live there and want to live there, right? we all too often become stagnant, and we think, well, I bought my house when this neighborhood was a single detached family neighborhood, and damn it, I want it to stay that way. But my response to that is, look, you bought your house, not your neighborhood. And my job as your elected official is to think about the next 7 generations. I can't just think about the current one. And when I see videos like that, I see what's at stake. Do we want St. John to have 7 more generations of neighborhoods that are subsidized, poor neighborhoods that are subsidizing wealthier ones? Or do we want St. John to be a beacon of equality and equitable treatment? And that's what I would want, right? And that's why I say, yes, I would welcome an apartment. It doesn't make sense to build apartments in Martinon. Of course it doesn't. But it might make sense to build apartments in Fundy Heights or out on Loch Lomond or up in Milledgeville or, in these different places. So that's kind of it for me. Like, this is that video. There's a bunch of other stuff by Strong Towns that I've read that has kind of informed me on this. I'm just seeing here another comment. This is Councillor Killen commenting on something before that we were talking about in the video. It speaks to why kids don't want to play outside anymore. Exactly. Would you want to play outside when you've got a 6-lane road that goes to a parking lot filled with 150 cars? There's nowhere to play like that. You can't, right? And so these third spaces, these gathering spaces where you can play are important. And we don't have enough of them. We just don't. And if you're in the Old North End, your ability to travel to those places, like, there's some beautiful spots in the North End. Don't get me wrong. Shamrock Park, you've got Spar Cove, you've got Queen Square up there. You've got, there are places to go, but then there's places uptown that you might want to get to that are not easily gotten to without a car or getting on the bus or whatever. Anne McShane, thanks, Brent. The difference between the Central Peninsula and some of our stable areas is how built out they are to date and how we've earmarked them for intensification. We need to determine how much intensification we need and expect in already stable neighborhoods. How much density do we need added to the sustainable service to be sustainable to service? Or are we intensifying to subsidize that? Or are we over intensifying, to subsidize the not sustainable? Anyway, I don't answer just lots of questions. I think you're right. And I think what I'm trying to produce in that video, Anne, is this idea that we can measure it. We haven't. I would like to, and I will be bringing a motion soon to council. I've been working with a couple of community members who are creating this tax density map, so we can see the density mapping of the community and be able to, like, intelligently say, neighborhood 1 over here costs us more money than it brings in, and neighborhood 2 over here overperforms. So maybe neighborhood 2 can be left alone and we don't have to bring further intensification, but maybe neighborhood 1 needs a remake, right? But if we don't have that to make our decisions, we're lost. It's really up to the opinion, the pressure of the public, and I don't want that to be the case. I don't want to be in a world where your council is driven by public pressure from a singular neighborhood. Because again, I'm an elected official, and what I do today may have 7 generations of impact. And I know this because I'm telling you, the decisions that were made in the 80s and the 90s in this city are hindering our ability to grow right now. So I'm paying the price. We are paying the price for the decisions that were made yesterday. I'm not saying that they were callous or malicious or evil or anything. I just mean they didn't use this metric to decide how to do things. And we need to. Plan SJ and the Central Peninsula Plan get us part of the way there, but they don't get us the whole way there. And that's something that we need to figure out. And that's something that we're working on. Neighborhood design matters. Yep, thank you. Protecting Irving. What's this one? Protecting Irving, paying for it now. Listen, I have been outspoken on how much this city has surrendered and abdicated the common good just to appease the interests of industry. There's no question about it. You could not find another municipality in this country, and I dare you to. I dare you to go and prove me wrong. Anybody out there, go and prove me wrong that this city has inordinately more than any other city in this country bent over and kowtowed to industry in its city design. We know the causeway had major influences. We know that the bridge, I mean, you can go back in the 60s and read um, all sorts of documentation from the 60s and 70s about the influence that industrialists were having on the design, the placement, and the direction of the number one highway bridge going through the city. Um, I've seen it in how we interact on industrial land. Um, you know, there's no question. No other city has done this. And cities like Pittsburgh, who did do that, like Pittsburgh, that was heavily industrialized and lost that industry, they had to pay a serious price when they lost that industry. We're all talking about what's going to happen with Irving Oil, right? They're floating a balloon right now, talking about this strategic analysis that they're trying to do right now to figure out what the future of the refinery and the company will be. People are afraid. They think you're going to lose your jobs. Think you're going to lose. I can guarantee you this. If the Irving refinery left tomorrow, wouldn't be enough money in the bank to pay the price that we would have to pay as a collective. This is the case. The tax density on industrial land is pathetic. It is absolutely pathetic. If you look at the tax density created in Champlain Heights and some of the lower east, I won't say the lower east side, we don't call it that, like the Mount Pleasant area in Champlain Heights, half as much land produces 3 times as much for the city of St. John. It's insane. You would think one of Canada's largest refinery, Canada's largest refinery, one of our singular most intensive GDP exporters, would create so much wealth for the city, but it doesn't. It goes to the province, goes to the feds. It doesn't come back. I'll give kudos where kudos is deserved. Our MP Wayne Long has done a terrific job turning the corner on getting federal investment in the city. There's no question about that. But we would need 3 more generations of that type of work and that type of outcome to make up for what's been lost. And we're going to have to figure out how to do this together. We're not going to be able to rely on our industrial partners to make up the difference. We're not going to be able to build our way out of this. There is going to be a pain point that we're going to have to pay as a city. And I hate to think about it. I do. I've lost sleep over this one, trying to figure out, what do we do? There's a lot of people living on the margins in this city. I can't go to them and ask them to pay more. That's just not going to work. But there are some people who can pay more, and they should be. And that's why this land design, this land use and this planning is so important for St. John. Because if we get this right in 7 generations, we may see a completely different story. We might be heralded as a place that took the lessons, applied the learning, made the changes, and were able to turn the corner. We're not there yet, but I hope that video that I showed, so anybody who's come in, I see a few more viewers have come in. Thank you for coming. This is going to be on YouTube. I'll share it on all my platforms. This video has been, this whole talk has been about how we do land use development and planning. And that last video that I showed you gives us some hints about the learning we need to do now, the work we need to do now, so we can make good informed decisions about how to intensify well, how to make sure our cost recovery is good, and that we build a city that other people will be honored to live in the future. So anyway, thanks for that, Michael. I see you're chiming in on here on Facebook. You're saying things like, and as an import from Ontario, it's unbalanced. It creates more money privately for some people in Rossay, and remediate the refinery and open an eco resort. Listen, there's all kinds of ideas that have been floated about the refinery. I'm definitely an environmentalist. I'm on the Community Energy Action Plan right now. We're trying to develop a pathway to net zero for all residents, for business, and everybody included, because it's going to save the city millions and millions of dollars if we do that, and it's going to lower pollution. It's going to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, lower waste. It's going to do all kinds of other good, wonderful things for our city if we can get there. But there's no question we're going to need the refinery. Oil products, petroleum products are going to be needed into the future. We can't turn it off. I'm not going to comment on whether the Irving oil should be sold or it shouldn't, but I will say this: we need to make sure that the host cities and host communities of these industries that we need as a society are given equitable support, because the price we pay for hosting industry is deep and we do not recover the cost on it. We only get 50% of the cost of the taxation that comes out of our industry sites. The city gets 100% of your residential, right? But we only get 50% of the industrial. Yet we have to have the highest paid, highest trained, most capable firefighters on standby to be able to service potential disaster, to keep public safety top of mind. We have to have roads that get beat up more due to heavy traffic. We have to have train whistles in our backyards. We do not get this type of support from the rest of this province and society for the input and the output that asset and those industrial sites give. And that can be changed. And the city of St. John has done an amazing job. And I don't care who out there thinks they haven't. I'm here to say I'm in the back rooms. I see what the work staff is doing. They've done a terrific job at trying to convince our partners in the province and the federal government that this is the case. And we're still working on it. So, we need help on that front. We need the public to be aware. We need the public to be engaged. We need you to vote differently. We need you to ask different questions. We need all those different things to come together to make that outcome a reality. Your municipality gets 8 cents of every dollar. If you paid $1 in taxes to the city of St. John last year, 8 cents of it came to the city. Or sorry, if you paid $1 in taxation, 8 cents of it came to the city. The other 92 was split up between the province and the feds. So it's a major problem. And I'll say this: there's no other, like I said, there's no other city in Canada that faces this disparity that we face here. All right, we're wrapping up here. I'm coming up on an hour. I don't want to go past an hour. Another question here from Cassandra Savoy, I think. Although I understand in part not wanting to give in to public pressure and neighborhood pressure, I think it's still important to sit down and listen to the neighborhood's concerns. You are absolutely right. That's the whole reason I'm doing this tonight, because again, I'm not in your neighborhood. It's one thing for me to say I don't mind an apartment building being built in my backyard. It's another thing for you as a neighborhood to come together. And the best outcome I can hope for is that the neighborhood wants that development and sees how it supports future generations and how it could even change in their generation, their outcomes and their service levels. Because again, what we forget is when we intensify an area, like Ann McShane was talking about, we need to make sure we're intensifying coherently. That's good. But when we do intensify an area, we also have to come back and service that area better, right? So that means all of a sudden, when we intensify, maybe transit needs to be rerouted to serve the people there. Maybe we need another park in that area because there's a higher population there and they're too far from, because we have standards around park placement, green space, common area. Some of that needs to be improved upon, no question. But I'm saying there is always, as you intensify, there should be a conversation happening about intensifying services as well. So plowing becomes faster. Like I'm a priority 4 road in Martinon, and I can tell you plenty of mornings I've had to walk to the bus that goes by on the Westfield Road in snow up to my ankles because I can't get the vehicle out of the driveway because the snowplow hasn't come yet. And you might say, well, that's not fair. But I know for a fact if we tried to plow every road as soon as snow hit on it, the city would go bankrupt. We don't produce enough taxation to warrant that level of service. So I'm okay with it. I hike up my bootstraps literally and trudge through the snow. I don't necessarily like it, but it is what it is. And I think the more we are able to have those conversations as neighborhoods and communities, like you're saying, Cassandra, the better we'll be, because we'll stop having people just get impassioned and emotional about losing something, and we'll start being able to have a conversation about what the future could look like and how we might all gain something. So anyway, that's my rant. We're up to an hour. I never like going more than an hour, so I'm going to cut us off. I see I see Counselor Killen's in here talking about billionaires and what's this one? You mean we still have to, so while we have to justify getting to net zero? I know it's true. We have an entire reality here with our planet Earth being in crisis and a climate crisis that we're going to have to figure out, right? We've done a poor job at looking after Mother Earth, and we are going to have to rectify that. And the pathway to net zero is one way that we can start to work on that. It's very important. Okay, that's it for tonight, folks. If you comment on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, I'll try to get back to you. This will live on YouTube forever. So if you only caught some of it, or if you're just getting the tail end of it and you want to watch the rest of it, go back and give it a go. Thanks, everybody, for chiming in. Thanks for coming out. And hopefully everybody has a great Wednesday evening.